The story is told about the man who wanted to give his wife a very special anniversary present. He went to a bird store, and after due deliberation, he paid $25 for a very fine parrot, which could say "Polly wants a cracker" and many other words. He told the clerk to deliver it to his wife. When the husband arrived home from work that evening, his wife greeted him at the door, all smiles and with appropriate gratitude for the anniversary remembrance. The husband was pleased with himself and said, "Where is it?" His wife replied, "It's in the oven. It will be ready at 6 o'clock. The husband said, "In the oven?" That was a very intelligent and expensive talking parrot that could say all sorts of words. His wife replied, "Well, if it was such a smart bird, why didn't it speak up?" That is why I'm here to visit with you for these few moments about the problems facing our country and what individual Americans can do in this bicentennial year. There are so many problems facing our country that it's hard to know where to begin. But let's start with the economic questions: jobs, unemployment, and inflation. Unemployment is at the highest level that most people can remember. Inflation has just leaped upwards again, which means we can buy less and less with the money we earn. And taxes take about a third of all the money we earn. Before we talk about the cure, we have to identify the problem. The evidence is clear that the federal government is the principal cause of most of the inflation and unemployment. Let's list some of the factors. First, there was the federal government's double devaluation of the U.S. dollar in 1971 and 1973, which officially reduced its buying power 20%. Secondly, there was the 1968 government decision to withdraw the 25% gold backing for all our money and to sell our gold to foreigners at the below-market price of $35 an ounce. Third, there is the fantastic foreign giveaway program that has doled out more than $200 billion of the American taxpayers' money to 138 foreign countries from Abyssinia to Zanzibar. These programs, plus the interest paid on the money our government had to borrow for these giveaways, are responsible for more than half of our entire national debt. And fourth, there is the network of special privilege laws lobbied through Congress that require the American taxpayers to make good the losses of U.S. businesses that invest in foreign countries. Since there is no such insurance for business losses inside the United States, smart money went to build factories and create jobs overseas. And fifth, there is the government policy of using U.S. taxpayers' money to make loans to the Soviet Union at 6 and 7% in order to finance the largest truck factory in the world, the largest fertilizer plant in the world, the largest tanker shipyard in the world, and the largest grain purchases ever made. And sixth, there is the policy of making Americans dependent on foreign oil by forbidding any drilling of the billions of barrels of oil reserves off our Atlantic, our Pacific, and our Alaskan coasts, and by blocking the Alaskan pipeline for 4 years. Take the aid that the Washington politicians have poured into India, for example. We've given India $10 billion over the last 25 years, more than any other country since the end of World War II. And what is the result? The Indian government has used our aid to invade neighboring countries. India always votes against us in the United Nations, and the present ruler has jailed all her opponents and moved into the Soviet orbit. Dr. Kissinger recently made a 2-week visit to Africa, where he announced our unrelenting opposition to one of the few remaining countries friendly to the United States. He offered $12.5 million of our money to Mozambique, which will help that country, that communist country, wage war on Rhodesia. A few days later, he offered $200 million in economic aid to anti-Rhodesian African countries. This type of handout is the triple ripoff of the American worker. Under such policies, we pay first in the $212 million of our tax money. We pay a second time in the inflation this causes because of the government deficits made necessary in order to finance such foreign handouts. But the third and heaviest cost is in jobs. When the American taxpayers' money is spent to build plants in foreign countries, this means we are creating jobs in other countries instead of in the United States. In the last decade, more than 1 million American workers have lost jobs because of runaway plants. That is, businesses which have opened plants in foreign countries after closing down or deliberately reducing production inside the United States. Billions of dollars in capital have been invested in foreign countries. A vital American technology has been exported. Patent rights have been sold with little or no regard for the economy of the United States or even for our security. The fault in all this is that these businesses do not operate at their own risk. The American people who are left holding the bag with empty plants and rising unemployment are also forced through their taxes to subsidize these runaway plants and or to guarantee the investors against loss. The reason why American workers have the highest standard of living in the world is because of the large capital investment per employee in plant and machinery. The average for all U.S. countries in our industries is $28,000 per employee. U.S. businesses are not likely to make this kind of investment in foreign countries where there are high risks of war, of revolution, of insurrection, of expropriation, or of currency inconvertibility. But government policies have deliberately promoted American investment in runaway plants by inducements such as government insurance against loss and long-term low-interest government loans and other gimmicks, all of which are paid for by the American taxpayers. But worse still, the Kissinger policies have forced us to subsidize the building of plants and the creation of jobs inside the Soviet Union and other communist countries. And now he wants us to do the same for pro-communist African countries. Now, there are many answers to these problems, but the most important thing is to elect a new president who will pledge to stop who will stop cheating the American workers of their hard-earned money. An American president who will stop deficit spending, which is the cause of inflation, who will put legal restraints on an unbalanced budget. We must stop this ripoff of the average worker, of the thrifty, productive middle class, and especially of our senior citizens who are living on fixed incomes. The next major problem that we face in our country is the problem of the schools. What we have witnessed in the last few years is the taking of religious and moral training out of the schools and the putting of the federal bureaucrats and the federal judges in control in the schools. There is no way that they can run the schools as well as local citizens. The results are not only a decline in learning, a social disruption, a fantastic increase in immorality, in illegitimate pregnancies and venereal disease, but actual crime inside the public schools is the fastest growing part of our current breakdown in social order. The National Education Association reported that last year, on school grounds, students committed 100 murders, 9,000 rapes, 12,000 armed robberies, 204,000 aggravated assaults, 270,000 burglaries, and they vandalized more than $600 million of school property. A recent report by the Harvard Law School Center for Criminal Justice bluntly states that the 6 worst cities in our country have at least 2,700 gangs with teenage members to the tune of 81,000, who terrorize public schools, shake down the pupils, and force them to pay for passing through a doorway, for using the gym or other sports facilities, for using cafeterias, and even for protection against being assaulted. The solution to this problem is to put God and moral training back in the schools and to get the HEW bureaucrats and the federal judges out so our young people can be trained in obedience to the Ten Commandments as well as to the laws of our country. We are told that this can't be done under U.S. Supreme Court decisions and HEW guidelines. This is a cop-out. The United States Constitution provides two excellent remedies for wrong Supreme Court decisions: a constitutional amendment or a congressional removal of jurisdiction from the federal courts. Many of the problems existing in the schools could be cured simply by the president telling the HEW department to stop trying to run our local schools. Don't let anyone tell you that it is a violation of the Constitution to have God and prayer in the schools. Every one of the founding fathers was educated in a religious school that had daily prayer and strict moral training. This year we are celebrating the bicentennial of the adoption of the Declaration of Independence, which is the official recognition by the American people of our belief and faith in God. The Declaration is a religious document from its first sentence to its last. It affirms God's existence as a self-evident truth. It defines our rights as God-given. There are 5 references to God in the Declaration of Independence: God as creator of all men, God as supreme lawmaker, God as the source of all our rights, and God as our patron and our protector. The Declaration proclaims that the purpose of government is to secure our unalienable individual God-given rights. It certainly is wrong to allow government to deny us our unalienable God-given right to give our school children the moral training so essential to good citizenship. It is time we had a president who will take the lead in giving the proper orders to the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, and in encouraging Congress to pass the necessary legislation. It is time we had a president who will encourage Congress to eliminate the double discriminatory tax burden placed on people who choose to put their children in private schools instead of in a public school where they're terrorized by teenage criminals. The alternative of a private school should be available not only to the rich, it should be equally available to poor and minority children. In the 19th century, the great French writer Alexis de Tocqueville traveled across our land, and he wrote commentaries which are still admired all over the world. His conclusion about our country was this: America is great because she is good, and if America ever ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. If we do not take immediate action to give religious and moral training to our children, America will cease to be great. For the last 7 years, Dr. Henry Kissinger has been in practically total control of our foreign policy, our defense policy, and our intelligence. No man in our history has ever held such total power in his hands. We have seen that presidents have changed, but Dr. Kissinger remains in control. He is the architect of our treaties with the Soviet Union, including the SALT agreements and the Helsinki Agreement. He was the policymaker for the last 4 years of the Vietnam War. One of President Ford's strongest supporters recently complained that the president is a captive of Henry K. The subordinate is controlling the chief. Now let us look at the matter of the United States Canal in Panama. It's a good example of the Kissinger policies. On February 7, 1974, Dr. Kissinger traveled to Panama, and he signed there an agreement to turn the United States Canal over to Panama. This was a completely unauthorized giveaway in violation of Article 4, Section 3 of the United States Constitution, which says that Congress shall have the power to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory and other property belonging to the United States. Our country has an investment of $6 billion in the canal. We bought and paid for it 4 times. We paid for it to the country of Panama. We bought it again from the country of Colombia. We paid off the stockholders in the original French company that tried to build the canal and failed, and then we bought the land again from the individual landowners. The canal zone was sold to the United States in perpetuity. There is no more reason for us to give it away than there would be to give away Alaska. Now, official spokesmen for the Ford administration have threatened that if we don't proceed with the Kissinger giveaway, Panama will engage in riots and violence and bloodshed. On the loss of American power and prestige since Dr. Kissinger went into office. The ruler of Panama is a man named Torrijos. He's a pro-communist dictator. He's a friend of Castro. He was never elected to office. He simply seized power and then abolished the Constitution. And now he threatens violence if we don't acquiesce in his demand that we turn over our canal. If communist dictators get the idea that they can extort whatever they want by threatening a riot, then our country is in for a bleak future from communist demagogues all the way from Castro to Brezhnev. A president and a secretary of state who won't stand up to Torrijos down in Panama certainly cannot be depended upon to protect American interests all the way from Castro to Brezhnev. Now, the centerpiece of the Kissinger foreign policy is détente with the Soviet Union. President Ford has said he won't use the word détente anymore. However, Brezhnev looks at it differently. He told the 25th Congress of the Communist Parties in Moscow that he likes détente because it creates more favorable conditions for communist advance. Brezhnev is correct. Détente is highly advantageous to the Soviets. We have seen that détente is a one-way street. It means that the Soviets eat our grain and we swallow their bologna. Détente didn't deter the Soviets from sending arms and weapons to North Vietnam to win the war and to violate the Paris Truce. Détente did not deter the Soviets from sending arms and weapons to the Arabs to carry on their war against Israel. And détente did not deter the Soviets from sending weapons to Angola to capture another country this year. Since President Ford went into the White House, the communists have taken over 5 new countries, 3 in Asia and 2 in Africa. That's quite a record, isn't it, for only 2 years of being president? But the worst part of the Kissinger policy of détente is not just what it has done to helpless little countries around the world, but it's what it has done to the United States, to our national security, and to our future survival. The day that Henry Kissinger went into office, our country had 1,054 intercontinental ballistic nuclear missiles, the backbone of our defense. Today, 7 years later, our country still has just 1,054 intercontinental ballistic missiles. We haven't added a single one. But meanwhile, the Soviets have added 1,000 intercontinental ballistic missiles, many of them far more powerful than ours. And today, the Soviet Union has 1,618 of these ICBMs, which means they have 50% more than we have. The day that Henry Kissinger went into office in 1969, the United States had 41 nuclear-firing Polaris-type submarines. Today, we still have just 41 Polaris-type submarines. But meanwhile, the Soviet Union has been building this same type of submarine at the rate of 7 or 8 a year, so that now they have 62, and we still have just 41. That means that they have 50% more Polaris-type submarines than we have. Henry Kissinger kept us in this missile freeze and submarine freeze all these years. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union was going ahead at a crash wartime rate. Henry Kissinger perpetuated this freeze in the SALT agreements of 1972. These agreements allowed the Soviets to continue the building program that they had in progress. Dr. Kissinger sold this plan to the American people on the theory that we were ahead of the Soviets in MIRVs. But the Soviets have now caught up with us in MIRVs, only now theirs are far more powerful than ours. The worst part of the SALT agreement, however, is that it gave up our right to defend our country against incoming enemy missiles. The SALT agreement forbids the United States to build an anti-missile system or to give any protection for our cities against incoming missiles. This is the most immoral thing that any leader of our country has ever done. I believe that every nation, just like every individual, should have the inalienable right to self-defense. But in the SALT agreement, this right to defend our cities against incoming missiles was signed away, whether the missiles come from Russia or China or Cuba or any other nation, or whether they come on a deliberate launch or an accidental launch. Instead of defending our country with weapons, Dr. Kissinger's plan is to defend us just by theories, which may or may not work, and by treaties which the Soviets may or may not keep. There is no more reason for us to rely on his treaties with the Soviet Union than there was for the people of Southeast Asia to rely on the Paris Agreement that he worked out. Now, there's some people who say it's a waste of money to build weapons, especially if we will never use them. But that is like saying that your money spent on fire insurance premiums is wasted if your house never burns down and you don't get a chance to collect. I will never feel cheated if I never collect on the fire insurance premiums I pay on my house. The military weapons that we need for the defense of our country, especially the anti-missile system, is our best insurance of peace. And the most successful weapons are the ones which are never used. That is because they convince the enemy in advance that we have more than enough to come out on top of any attack that he might choose to make. The 1,054 intercontinental ballistic missiles and the 41 Polaris-type submarines that we have today all represent the vision, the planning, and the technology of the Eisenhower administration. They were ordered back in the Eisenhower years, although many of them kept coming through the pipelines in the years after he left the White House. But those levels, those figures, do show the amount of security that President Eisenhower felt we needed 20 years ago to defend ourselves against the Soviet Union. The Eisenhower policy for defense was best summed up in the great words which have been inscribed on the keel of the aircraft carrier which bears his name. Until war is eliminated from international relations, it is criminal to be unprepared against any aggressor. And it is criminal to be unprepared against the Soviet military machine. In a recent television interview, Alexander Solzhenitsyn shook his head in disbelief. He doesn't think it makes sense that the United States, possessing freedom, does not value it enough to defend it. Now it's obvious that Henry Kissinger does not want to defend our freedom with military strength. He is gambling on his theories and his treaties. Solzhenitsyn is correct as to his analysis of Kissinger's policies and also the policies of the president who has appointed Dr. Kissinger. But I believe Solzhenitsyn is wrong as to the desires of the American people. We do value freedom enough to defend it and to defend it with the weapons that we need. Now, do the American people have the financial resources to stay ahead of the Soviet Union? Of course we do. We are the great can-do nation that defeated two powerful enemies on two fronts during World War II and then sent a man to the moon. We can do anything we make up our minds to do, but of course we must make up our mind to do it. God has blessed our nation with a gross national product twice that of the Soviet Union. Well, many of them kept coming through the pipelines in the years after he left the White House. But those levels, those figures, do show the amount of security that President Eisenhower felt we needed 20 years ago to defend ourselves against the Soviet Union. The Eisenhower policy for defense was best summed up in the great words which have been inscribed on the keel of the aircraft carrier which bears his name. Until war is eliminated from international relations, it is criminal to be unprepared against any aggressor. And it is criminal to be unprepared against the Soviet military machine. In a recent television interview, Alexander Solzhenitsyn shook his head in disbelief. He doesn't think it makes sense that the United States, possessing freedom, does not value it enough to defend it. Now it's obvious that Henry Kissinger does not want to defend our freedom with military strength. He is gambling on his theories and his treaties. Solzhenitsyn is correct as to his analysis of Kissinger's policies and also the policies of the president who has appointed Dr. Kissinger. But I believe Solzhenitsyn is wrong as to the desires of the American people. We do value freedom enough to defend it and to defend it with the weapons that we need. Now, do the American people have the financial resources to stay ahead of the Soviet Union? Of course we do. We are the great can-do nation that defeated two powerful enemies on two fronts during World War II and then sent a man to the moon. We can do anything we make up our minds to do, but of course we must make up our mind to do it. God has blessed our nation with a gross national product twice that of the Soviet Union. With our double wealth and our ingenuity and our resourcefulness, we can stay ahead of the Soviets. But the long lead times require that we take action now, this year, in 1976. After this year, we will have gone past the point of no return. Sometimes individuals are overwhelmed with the enormity of national problems and what we can do about it. There is one thing we can do. We can cast our vote for the candidate best able to change the policies of high taxes, galloping inflation, wasteful government spending, reduction of military strength, and retreat all over the world. Fortunately, we have a man with the courage to challenge the existing policies in Washington today and the ability to cope with them. Ronald Reagan has demonstrated that he has the executive ability because he served for 8 years as governor of our largest state. He has shown that he can cope with the bureaucracy while at the same time reducing taxes, cutting spending, and accomplishing significant welfare reform. In the primaries this year, he has demonstrated that he can and will articulate the issues that concern the survival of America as a free and independent nation, and that he will stand up for the defense of our country and not be bullied or intimidated by any Panama dictator who wants to steal our canal by threatening a riot. Most of all, Ronald Reagan clearly has exposed the fallacies of Détente and the mischief and the tragedy of the Kissinger policies. Our nation cannot long endure the leadership of a president whose policy decisions are made for him either by Nelson Rockefeller or by Henry Kissinger. The political process has given Ronald Reagan the trial and the experience, and he has stood the test. I believe he can do the job our country needs, and that's why I'm asking you to join with me in voting for Ronald Reagan. No matter which party you belong to, I believe you can do more by voting for Reagan than anyone else. When Abraham Lincoln left Springfield, Illinois, to go to the White House at one of our country's most critical times, he made one statement which I think best expresses the responsibility of the individual to do his part or her part to help preserve our great nation. Abe Lincoln said, "I appeal to you constantly to bear in mind that not with politicians, not with presidents, not with office seekers, but with you, the American people, is the question. Shall the Union and shall the liberties of this country be preserved to the latest generations? It is up to you and me to act now, to vote for, to work for, and to contribute to the right man for president. I think that man is Governor Ronald Reagan, and I hope you will support him."